export and import policies relevant to agriculture and allied sectors. Introduction. Agriculture in India is in the hands of millions of peasant households, a bulk of which comprise tiny land holdings with preponderance of owner cultivation. There is hardly any direct government intervention in the production and investment decisions of the farmers, but the government does influence the legal, material, and economic environment in which farmers operate. Though tremendous progress has been made to exploit irrigation potential in the country, still two-thirds of area under cultivation is unirrigated, and there is thus heavy dependence of production on vagaries of nature. That is, rainfall. Irrigated area have experienced sharp increase in productivity level, and large part of output as a farm is for market. On the other hand, productivity in unirrigated areas has remained either stagnant or experienced very small growth, and most of the farmers in such areas produce for subsistence purpose. At overall level, agricultural growth remains slow, just above 3% in the country. Apart from that, agricultural growth remains confined to a few well-endowed pockets, which has created regional disparities. Agribusiness is witnessing major changes worldwide due to liberalization of the trade in agricultural commodities, and agricultural marketing system in the country needs to be integrated and strengthened to enable the farming community benefit from new global market access opportunities in the form of export and import of agricultural commodities. Understanding World Trade Organization (WTO). The WTO came in being in 1995. The WTO is a successor to GATT, established in 1948. The WTO deals with the rules of trade between nations at a global or near global level. This organization has 169 members at present. It has 6 main parts. They are: number 1, the agreement establishing the WTO. Number 2, goods and investment. The multilateral agreements on trade in goods, including the GATT 1994 and the trade-related investment measures. Number 3, services. The General Agreement on Trade in Services. Number 4, intellectual property. The Agreement on the Trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, TRIPS. Number 5, dispute settlement, also known as DSU. Reviews of government's trade policies, also known as TPRM. WTO agreements. Number 1, Agreement on Agriculture, AOA. The WTO oversees about 60 different agreements which have the status of international legal texts. Member countries must sign and ratify all WTO agreements on accession. The AOA came into effect with the establishment of the WTO at the beginning of 1995. The AO has 3 central concepts or pillars: domestic support, market access, and export subsidies. Number 2, General Agreement on Trade in Services, GATS. Before WTO's Uruguay round negotiation began in 1986, services were not included in international trade agreements. Most services have traditionally been classed as domestic activities difficult to trade across borders. Some services categories have been viewed as domains for government ownership and control, given their infrastructural importance and susceptibility to national monopolies. A third important group of sectors, including health, education, and water services are considered in many countries as governmental responsibilities to be regulated and not left to the vagaries of markets. Nevertheless, some services sectors, in particular international finance and maritime transport, have been largely open for centuries as necessary components of merchandise trade. Other large sectors have undergone phenomenal technical and regulatory changes in recent decades, opening them in private commercial participation and reducing barriers to entry. The development of information technology and internet have explained the range of internationally tradable serviced products, which include e-banking, telemedicine, distant learning, as well as international remote gambling, spam, and other things. Governments are increasingly being influenced to expose former monopoly services to international competition. At the same time, powerful countervailing arguments and civil society movements have been pressing for fuller accountability and legislative restrictions to potentially unethical market and corporate behaviors. Number 3. Trade-related intellectual property rights, TRIPS. The agreement on TRIPS is an international agreement administered by the WTO that sets down minimum standards for many forms of intellectual property regulation. It was negotiated at the end of the Uruguay round of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, GATT, in 1994. Specifically, TRIPS contains requirements that nations' law must meet for copyright rights, including the rights of performer, producers of the sound recording and broadcasting organization, geographical indication, including application of the origin, industrial designs, integrated circuit layout designs, then patents, monopolies for the developer of the new plant varieties, trademarks, trade dress, and undisclosed or confidential information. The fourth one, sanitary and phytosanitary SPS agreements. The agreement on application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, also known as SPS agreement, is an international treaty of the World Trade Organization. It was negotiated during the Uruguay round of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and entered into force with establishment of the WTO at the beginning of 1995. Under the SPS agreement, the WTO sets constraints on member states' policies relating to food safety, bacterial contaminants, pesticides, inspections, and labeling, as well as animal and plant health, phytosanitary, about imported pests and diseases. The SPS agreement gives the WTO the power to override a country's use of the precautionary principle, a principle which allows them to act on a side of caution if there is no scientific certainty about potential threats to human health and environment. Under SPS rules, the burden of proof is on countries to demonstrate scientifically that something is dangerous before it can be regulated. Even though scientists agree that it is impossible to predict all forms of damage posed by insects or pest plants. Quarantine policies play an important role in ensuring the protection of human, animal, and plant health. Yet, under the SPS agreement, quarantine barriers can be a technical trade barrier used to keep out foreign competitors. Number 5. Genetically modified organisms, GMO. A genetically modified organism, GMO, or genetically engineered organism, GEO, is an organism whose genetic material has been altered using genetic engineering techniques. These techniques are generally known as recombinant DNA technology. With recombinant DNA technology, DNA molecules from different sources are combined in vitro into one molecule to create a new gene. This DNA is then transferred into an organism and causes the expression of modified or noble traits. The general principle of producing a GMO is to add a lot of genetic material into an organism's genome to generate new trait. Genetic engineering was made possible through a series of scientific advances, including the discovery of DNA and the creation of the first recombinant bacteria in 1973, that is E. coli, expressing a Salmonella gene. This led to concerns in the scientific community about potential risks from genetic engineering. Number 6. Technical barriers to trade, TBT. The Agreement on Technical Barriers to Trade, also known as TBT Agreement, is an international treaty of the World Trade Organization. It was negotiated during the Uruguay round of General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and entered into force with the establishment of WTO at the beginning of 1995. The object of the TBT agreement is to ensure that technical negotiations and standards, as well as testing and certification procedures, do not create unnecessary obstacles to trade. Agreement on Agriculture, AOA. The Agreement on Agriculture is an international treaty of the World Trade Organization. It was negotiated during the Uruguay round of the General Assembly on Tariffs and Trade and entered into force with establishment of WTO on 1st of January 1995. The AOA has three central concepts or pillars: domestic support, market access, and export subsidies. Domestic support. The first pillar of the AOA is domestic support. The AOA structures domestic support into three categories as boxes: a green boxed, an amber boxed, and a blue boxed. The green boxed contains fixed payment to producers for environmental programs so long as the payments are decoupled from current production levels. The amber box contains domestic subsidies that governments have agreed to reduce but not eliminate. The blue box contains subsidies which can be increased without limit, to long as payments are linked to production limiting programs. Market access is the second pillar of the AOA and refers to the reduction of tariff or non-tariff barriers to trade by WTO members. The 1995 AOA required tariff reduction to, number 1, 36% average reduction by developed countries with a minimum per tariff line reduction of 15% over 5 years. Number 2, 24% average reduction by developing countries with a minimum per tariff line reduction of 10% over 9 years. Least developed countries, LDCs, were exempted from tariff reduction. Least developed countries, LDCs, were exempted from tariff reductions, but either had to convert non-tariff barriers to tariffs, a process called tariffication, or bind their tariffs, creating a ceiling which could not be increased in future. Export subsidies. Export subsidies is the third pillar of the AOA. The 1995 AOA agreement required developed countries to reduce export subsidies by at least 35% by value or by at least 21% by volume over the 5 years to 2000. Implications on agriculture. The Uruguay Round Agreement sought to bring order and fair competition to these highly distorted sectors of world trade by establishment of a fair and market-oriented agricultural trading sector. The root cause of distortion of international trade in agriculture has been the massive domestic subsidies given by the industrialized countries to their agricultural sector over many years. This in turn led to excessive production and its dumping in international market, as well as import restrictions to keep out foreign agricultural products from their domestic markets. Hence, the starting point for establishment of a fair agricultural regime has to be the reduction of domestic production subsidies given by industrialized countries, reduction in the volume of subsidized exports, and minimum market access opportunities for agricultural producers worldwide. Product coverage. The agreement defines agricultural products by references to the harmonized system of product classification. The definition covers not only basic agricultural products such as wheat, milk, and live animals, but the products derived from them such as bread, butter, other dairy products, and meat, as well as all processed agricultural products such as chocolates and sauces. The coverage includes wines, spirits, and tobacco products, fibers such as cotton, wool, and silk, and raw animal scales destined for leather production. Fish and fish products are not included, nor are forestry products. Implementation period. The implementation period for the country's specific commitments is the 6th-year period commencing in 1995. However, developing countries have the flexibility to implement their reduction and other specific commitments over a period up to 10 years. Members had the choice of implementing their concessions and commitments on the basis of calendar, marketing, for example, crop, or fiscal year. A WTO member's implementation year for tariff reduction may thus differ from the one applied to export subsidy reduction. For the purpose of the peace clause, the implementation period is a 9-year period commencing in the year 1995. Committee on Agriculture. The agreement on agriculture is overseen by the Committee on Agriculture, which reviews progress in implementation of commitments mentioned above. The agreement also calls for further negotiations to be initiated before the end of the 5th year of implementation. The agreement is thus coming up for review at the end of 1999. India has not undertaken any commitments under the Uruguay Round Agreements on Agriculture (AOA), which constrains us from following our developmental policy with regard to agriculture or which entail any action or on our side immediately. We would, however, need to study the implications of removal of quantitative restrictions on market access, subsidy to farmers, and tariffs on imports. The structure of the agreement on agriculture as it exists today seems to be slightly imbalanced, since it enables countries subsidizing the agriculture sector heavily to retain a substantial portion of their subsidies up to the end of the implementation period, while those countries which were not using this measure earlier are prohibited to use these measures in future beyond the de minimis limit. We have to find ways to bring about more equity into the structure of the agreement. Impact of WTO. Indian agriculture has undergone significant changes and transformations during the last 50 years. The decade of 1990s has shown significant improvement in terms of trade for agriculture. The process of trade reforms has been further intensified since 1995 following implementation of WTO Agreement on Agriculture. These concerns related to food security, nutrition, growth of agriculture sector, regional equity, price stability, farm income, welfare of consumers and producers, sustainability, and associated effects. The impact of trade liberalization on Indian farmers have been felt through various channels such as volatile prices, problems in imports and exports, impact on livelihood and other employment opportunities, while output volatility increased especially with new seeds and other inputs. The prices of most non-food grain crops such as those of the cotton and oilseeds plummeted for prolonged periods. This reflected not only domestic demand conditions but also the growing role played by international prices, consequent upon greater integration with world market in this sector. Since Indian farmers are known to have very elastic responses to relative price signal in terms of changing acreage, this caused large and often undesirable shifts in cropping pattern which ultimately rebounded on the farmers themselves. The pattern of lower prices accompanying relatively lower output reflected the effect on growing integration of Indian agriculture with world markets resulting from trade liberalization. As both exports and imports of agricultural products are progressively freed, international price movements are more closely reflected in domestic trends and prices. Foreign Trade Policy 2015 to 2020. The Government of India, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, has announced new foreign trade policy on 1st April 2015 for the period 2015 to 2020. Earlier, this policy is known as Export-Import Exempt Policy. For every 5 years interval, foreign trade policy needs amendments. In general, aims at developing export potential, improving export performance, encouraging foreign trade, and creating favorable balance of payment position. The policy is updated every year on the 31st of March, and the modification, improvements, and new schemes become effective from April month of each year. Under this new foreign trade policy, it may be noted that merchandise exports from India scheme higher rewards have been granted for the following category of products. Number 1, agriculture and village industry products, presently covered under Vishesh Krishi and Gram Udyog Yojana. Value added and packaged products, eco-friendly and green products that creates wealth out of waste from agriculture and other waste products that generate additional income for the farmers while improving the environment. Labor-intensive products with large employment potential and products with large number of producers and or exporters. Industrial products from potential winning sectors. High-tech products with high export earning potential. Conclusion. Therefore, an agripreneur needs to keep abreast all the new updates, keeping in view the agreement on agriculture associated with the new policy with reference to WTO, so that his or her enterprise propels. The awareness about WTO and its implications for Indian agriculture will help in understanding the need for explicit recognition of farmers' privileges and farmers' rights and sui generis system, protecting the interest of small and marginal farmers, safeguarding the interest of the vast consumers, gaining from international trade through comparative advantage, the need to harmonize the implication of Convention on Biodiversity, international undertaking on plant genetic resources, the environmental implications of international trade, which holds tremendous challenge in agriculture, patenting the products and services of India.